Each year, Microsoft Research hosts hundreds of influential speakers from around the world, including leading scientists, renowned experts in technology, book authors, and leading academics, and makes videos of these lectures freely available.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming. My name is Deborah Carnegie, and I'm pleased to welcome Erica Ariel Fox to the Microsoft Research Visiting Speaker Series. Erica's here to discuss her book, which is a New York Times bestseller, Winning from Within, a breakthrough method for leading, living, and lasting change. Erica is a longtime lecturer at Harvard Law School's program on negotiation and a founding partner at Mobius Executive Leadership. She also serves as a senior advisor to McKinsey Leadership Development. Mixing nearly 2 decades of experience with business leaders and a personal touch, Erica brings a unique voice to the conversation about leading wisely and living well. Please join me in giving her a warm welcome.
Thank you, Deb. Greetings, all of you. Thank you very much for coming. I've been on a whirlwind tour for the last month and a half, doing talks all over the place, talking about the book, sharing about the ideas, and I always want to share one of my most recent adventures with wherever I am speaking next. So I want to share with you, about a week ago, I was in Los Angeles, and I was at a talent agency where the people were very, very nice, and we were exploring an idea, which is, how many of you have ever seen a show called Super Nanny? Did you ever see Super Nanny? Okay, see? So Super Nanny, for those of you who don't know, she parachutes in to highly dysfunctional families. The kids are screaming and running around, and Super Nanny comes in and she gives parenting advice. And then in the second half of the show, you see the happy family implementing all of Super Nanny's excellent advice. So the idea was this show would be called The Coach. And there would be some dysfunctional executive team, and then I would parachute in like Super Nanny and identify what was going wrong, and then I would give coaching to the team, and then you'd see them all very high-performing team at the end. So we pitched the idea, and these incredibly nice women look at me and they said, you know what the new trend is in television? Naked. Naked is actually apparently like the in thing on television. So for example, Survivor used to be normal Survivor, but now it's like naked and afraid Survivor. So could there be a way we could do the show naked? I'm thinking, yeah, this is not, that wasn't my vision. And I think the naked coach, no one's gonna watch that. Yeah. Anyway, I want to share that with you just as a way of linking my adventures on the road. I hope there will be fewer curveballs in this conversation today than that one. But I'm very happy to be here to talk to you guys about the book and promise not to parachute into your lives after this looking for dysfunction. What I want to talk about is the way that we all get in our own way. In our lives, in our leadership, in our professional teams, in the projects that we pursue, in our love lives. Probably not any of you here, but some people mess things up in their love lives. And give you a pretty clear map for something you can do about that. And I came to get very interested in this, the idea of how we prevent ourselves from doing things that we know we could do, we should do. We've had training, or we've read a lot of good books, and we have tools and techniques, but oftentimes when it matters most, we don't use them. So many years ago, I was teaching an executive education program at Harvard Law School. It was a week-long seminar, and we had 1 faculty member and 3 delegates. So let's imagine I'm working with the 3 of you, and the exercise would be taking place over the course of a day. We had a video camera. We were going to give video feedback to people. And each person had the chance to choose a challenge, something that was really difficult in their lives, and they would bring it the next day, and we'd work together as a team, with a coach, trying to really get a breakthrough. So in one instance of running this exercise, I found out the night before that one of the people in my group was a justice on the Supreme Court. You're supposed to be daunted and say, ooh. Ooh. I was 25. I had just graduated from law school. And my job the next day was to give coaching to this person. Thank you. See, now you get the ridiculousness of the situation. And I, panicked. I was thinking, what could I possibly have to say to this person? And I started fantasizing if he has conflicts with Parliament or, sentencing guidelines and his other justices on who knows what he's going to want to talk about. This was not, by the way, a U.S. justice. It was a high court judge from another country. But I couldn't really imagine what he would bring. Fast forward to the next day. It's his turn to do the exercise, and we ask him, very elegant gentleman, respectfully, sir, if you could tell us about the challenge you chose. He says, I really want my wife to stop choosing my ties. And with total sincerity. And I said, I'm sorry? He says, for 50 years, I come out of the washroom and she's laid my clothes out on the bed. Why does she do that? I hate that.
She loves you.
Aww. Yeah, he said she loves you. So I asked him a question, which was, have you ever asked her not to do that? Now that is my problem. I simply cannot bring myself to ask her to stop. And in that moment, I really started to see negotiation, conversation, leadership interactions in a totally new way. Because this actually wasn't a conflict between the judge and his wife. It was a conflict inside of him. A part of him that wanted to say something, a part of him that didn't. Right? We could role play lines, like you could practice, how about you don't do that anymore? Or we could practice, I'm brainstorming. How about if you pick out my outfits Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and I do it Tuesday, Thursday, do some joint problem solving. This is a problem inside of himself. And the way to get out of it is not going to be practicing what he can say. It's going to be identifying these parts inside of him that are in conflict, getting really clear what they are and what they care about, what they want from him. And then, in essence, getting to yes inside of himself so that he can then go interact with someone else. And from that moment on, I've been researching and talking and teaching and writing about the idea that the most important negotiations you have in your life are the ones you have with yourself. When we think about negotiating, either buying a house or asking for a salary raise or negotiating for product sharing across maybe different tech companies, or what's going on now in the Crimea, negotiating big world affairs or massive business deals. Negotiation is actually something you do every day, all day, with yourself. But there's really not been before a very good map for what that looks like or how to get good at it. So that's what I became really interested in. My belief is that every single one of us mess up our lives every day, all the time. We may have different ways of doing that. We may shut down. Someone else might lash out, right? Someone else might just walk out, deny a conflict. We might just get physically ill, not knowing what to do. But most people have some examples in their lives where they either did say and do something or they chose not to do or say something, and then they're left with regret, right? Anybody ever have that experience? You lay in bed at night like, oh my God, I just told my boss to shut up. Yeah, so I actually did have this experience 2 nights ago. I had gone from Los Angeles to San Francisco. I was in San Francisco right before here. And I saw somebody who I hadn't seen for a long time. The backdrop you need to know from this is that I got married 3 years ago. And this person was a friend of my husband, my now husband. I haven't seen him since before the wedding. So he came up to me, he was in a cocktail party, and he said, hey, how are my dear friends, Erica and Bernardus? That's my husband. And I said, not that dear friends, because you didn't even RSVP to our wedding. And I thought, wow, I didn't plan for that to happen. This is a completely true story. And he said, what? And I said, I'm just saying, I mean, we can chit chat, if you want, but I mean, not really good friends, right? Because, I mean, you didn't come, actually didn't even RSVP. I actually said this 2 days ago. So actually don't read this book or listen to anything I say. I have nothing for you. But and then I had to write an email, which I was like horrified. So, oh, I'm so sorry, that didn't come out right, and it didn't, right? Really, I feel hurt from that time. I felt hurt for my husband because it was his friend. I've been carrying it, right? I haven't seen him. And when I saw him, the first thing that rose in me was the memory of like, that was painful. That it felt then, he didn't care enough about us to even tell us he wasn't coming. And having never met him before, it was just, there it was. So then he wrote me back and he said, it's okay. And so just so you know, it's all been kind of worked out. But I offer you this example just to say that it really is part of our daily lives. Even people like me who practice a lot, we have moments where we get defensive, reactive, we get hooked in some way. Maybe we feel threatened or insulted, scared. And we wind up doing things that are much less effective than what we know we're capable of. I have plenty of experiences of not attacking friends at cocktail parties. So that's not my best. So the way I think about the problem that winning from within aims to help people with is mess and miss. On the one hand, we mess up our lives. We mess things up at work. We mess things up with our families, in communities, on boards we serve on, from CEOs to summer interns, even though we know better. We also just simply miss opportunities. You can imagine yourself sitting around a room, in a conference room, sitting around a table, and somebody says there's a really cool new project, who might like to volunteer, and maybe part of you is thinking, ooh, like I would love to do that, but then you think, well, you don't want to look selfish, or maybe other people should get the opportunity, or I don't know, this is like a very high status person, it's nerve-wracking, what if you don't impress the person, then you just don't, and someone else raised their hand, is like, great, well, that person got that project. And then again, you have to go home at night and say, why didn't I volunteer for that? That was a great project for me. So oftentimes, we wind up making mistakes, missing opportunities, and then we're just left asking ourselves, okay, well, now what? And I think people will be happier, more successful, and more genuinely fulfilled if we start to have a way to avoid this cycle entirely. You don't have to fix it at this point. You want to have a way to get ahead of it. As I say, it doesn't work all the time, but you can learn ways to understand yourself, discover parts of yourself, develop them, and learn along the path of mastery of yourself that you actually can cut down dramatically these suboptimal situations. So the way I talk about this in the book is as a performance gap. We have on the one hand our highest potential to behave. I could have been lovely to that guy. Been happy to see him. We have what we actually do in real life, right? I shut down. I didn't volunteer. I sent that email. I know I shouldn't have sent it. That's a gap between your best potential, what you really could do, right? The judge knows how to say something to his wife, and what you actually do, which in his story is nothing, but just let it eat you up inside for 40 years. So I want to share with you 4 steps in the next 15 minutes as a roadmap for a process you can learn that will help you close that performance gap. And the 4 steps are, 1, that you start to recognize your big 4, which I'll define in a moment. That you start to recognize them in general, and you start to appreciate how they operate in you. That's your profile. That's your big 4 constellation. That you start to learn the process of negotiating with yourself. I said before that a lot of negotiation training, a lot of negotiation frameworks are about how to make deals with other people, how to deal with difficult people, or crazy people. In this case, the difficult person you learn to deal with is yourself, and it makes your life easier. And the last one is that you set off on an ongoing journey, that you appreciate, that you can become more and more skillful over time. You can gain capacity that you don't have today, and that's part of the journey. It doesn't happen overnight. Okay, so step one is a somewhat radical idea. And that radical idea is that you, what you think of as me, is not singular. You are plural. Walt Whitman said a long time ago, "I am large. I contain multitudes." What does that mean? Joseph Campbell described human beings as a hero with 1,000 faces, right? How many of you know that reference? So there's a long, long tradition of recognizing that the human condition, our inner experience, is not unitary. There are different parts of us. But in our society, in our culture today, at least in the West, we've largely lost track of that tradition, which is hundreds and hundreds of years old, that has guides and maps for how to understand, how to navigate this inner world that is complex. So the idea is that you start to recognize, actually, I am me, but there's a bunch of different parts of me in there, and figuring out how they operate, what makes me tick, is going to be much more helpful than just operating on autopilot with no understanding of what's going on. So I said Joseph Campbell talked about 1,000 faces. I think that is unwieldy, certainly for people in business life. So I've honed in on what I call the big four. That is not in any way to say that the human condition has 4 parts and nothing more. There are many lineages that could tell you you have 100, you have 1,000 different dimensions. I focus on these 4 for 2 reasons. One, in 10 years of research, I can tell you that these 4 show up again and again in different names, in different languages, but over and over. From cave dwellers to depth psychologists to now neuroscientists who are mapping the brain, say we have a part of us that dreams, that longs for a better future, a part of us that thinks rationally, a part of us that feels, and a part of us that wants to take action and get things done. These 4 are very fundamental. And the second reason is I've just experienced that using them with executives in many different industries, they're just helpful. People get them quickly, they notice which ones they're using and not using, and then they start to gain capacity pretty quickly. So I apologize, there's no CTO here. I realized this morning that was, we could add that. But the image that I want to offer you is of an inner executive team. As if you had these executives inside of you, a CEO that was about setting direction and vision and possibility, a CFO or general counsel that likes to gather facts and information, takes different perspectives, helps you manage risk and evaluate trade-offs. You have an HR expert who cares about people, who knows how to engage employees or create a sense of affiliation on a team, that whole set of skills. And finally, you have a sort of chief operating officer who really wants to keep the trains on track and help you get things done. How many people with that description can start to see parts of yourself that if we asked your friends to describe, do you see 1 or 2 of these inside of yourself? Okay, great. So the first step is just recognizing you have these 4. It turns out that they actually are a lot like different negotiating parties, which is why I talk about the negotiation within. They have different values, different interests, different priorities, different styles of communicating with you. And you really want to get to know them. The second step is to start thinking about what I call your profile. And that means everyone in this room has some tendencies around how you use these 4. You all have all 4 of them as potential. But most people tend to use one or two of them a lot, maybe have one that they would just never use. They say, well, that's just not me. I'm not like that. You have different situations where you call on them for different reasons. So a profile essentially means I started to come to notice that in many situations, I'm really only using these skills, and I'm not using those. And that's just a good awareness to start with. So many business people who I work with, for example, are very productive in terms of their jobs. Their clients like them a lot, and they have teams that constantly complain about them in 360-degree feedback. Right? People criticize, they're so mean, the guy's a bully, I think he hates me. And when I confront executives with that information, they often are shocked. They don't see that side of themselves. If you ask them, do you push your team very hard? They will say, they don't work harder than I do, right? And we have standards of excellence. So it could be true that one of these is an overdrive in your life, and you may not even notice. There's also a common pattern I've seen in organizations where one person on the team is sort of the isolated patient, identified patient, as like they're the people person. They remember the birthday of everybody on the team. Maybe some of you are this person. They always want to check in when people get back from vacation and holidays. But they run a risk, which is really straight, logical business people don't always take them seriously. They seem sort of lightweight. So checking in with the people in your team is a wonderful skill, balanced in a business environment with demonstrating you can make a logical argument, that you know how to analyze information, right? You have to balance these strengths depending on the circumstances that you're in, not get stuck in only one or two of these, because that's where you're comfortable. So I want to give you guys 2 minutes before I keep going to turn to someone near you, could be someone behind you, someone in front of you, and ask yourself this. If we ask the people who know you best, take your own self out of it. If we ask the people who work with you every day, people who live with you, to describe your profile, he's always thinking, always trying to solve problems, but not the most relational, emotional guy. Or no, I think actually you're pretty balanced at all those things, although maybe the dreamer hasn't been very active lately. Just take a minute with somebody near you. What would the people who know you well, do you think, say about how you use these 4 in your life? Okay, 30 seconds. Okay, just between us. I know it's being videoed, but if you put that out of your mind. Anybody want to share anything that came to mind? Maybe not about yourself, but about a hypothetical person. How many of you found when you thought about it that you probably do have one or two that you use more, or even three, but that there's one or two that you don't use nearly as much? How many people found that? So that's pretty common. And what I want to say to you is that you have this full breadth of potential. This is like an inner technology. These parts of you have tools and techniques and methods and processes, and it's as if you're only using half the inner technology available to you, which I know none of you would do with real technology. So it's really important to start to investigate these parts of you. Something I feel also pretty strongly about is the basic principle that we do all have these big four. We use them to varying degrees. There are a lot of corporate typing systems, right, that will tell you you're blue or green, but then you're not red. Or, of course, Myers-Briggs, very well known and enormous contribution to helping people understand themselves. But at the same time, can give people the impression, oh, I'm a thinker, not a feeler. Right? I'm this and therefore not that. And I don't believe that. We have the intrinsic, inborn, innate capacity to live fully, broadly to our full potential. It's likely true that over the course of our lives, we've learned things through success and failure, like I'm very good at this, so I'm going to keep doing that. Or maybe someone in my life told me acting like that is no good, and I stopped doing it. But now we're all adults, and we can open our eyes and say, hey, there are parts of myself I left behind. Maybe because my first manager told me, you know, I'll never be a people person because I'm a brilliant tech person. That's just not true. And I can tell you that from working with thousands and thousands of executives. The story you tell yourself, the profile or identity that you describe can limit you. And it can also open a lot of new possibilities if you're willing to explore how you describe your profile and what else could become possible. So 2 more steps. The third, this is kind of where the rubber meets the road. Once you have the awareness and the insight, you learn to negotiate with yourself. You learn to notice there are different parts of me in a conflict, and instead of just having some vague sense of discomfort or stomachache or migraine, I'm aware that different parts of me have different preferences or priorities here. I'm going to hear them out and then decide. And I'll give you an example of this. I was working with a large company based in Europe, and I was working with the executive team. They were negotiating a very big contract with a company based here in New York. And these negotiations had gone on for months. The deal on the table seemed pretty sound. They had had different people evaluate it. And essentially, they had a deal. The US organization sent over a contract to the Europeans to sign. And my client called me hysterical, and he said, they wrote the amount in US dollars, not in euros. Which means that although we agreed to these numbers, they're paying whatever it was at the time, you know, half or 2/3 of the amount because they wrote it US dollars and we're negotiating in euros the whole time. So he called his lawyer, of course. And he had his lawyer call the lawyer in the US, and they said, I think we're having some kind of a breakdown here. We had agreed to these terms and conditions under the understanding that the shared currency was in euros. And the lawyer actually was very apologetic. It was just a mistake, innocent mistake. We're going to fix it. We're going to send you a new contract. So the lawyer wasn't sure whether he believed it or not, but he said, what do I care? They're going to give us the contract we thought we agreed on in euros. The client, the executive I worked with, he did not agree. He said, this is not an innocent mistake. This is an intentional attempt, to rip us off. Did they think we wouldn't notice? And he just wanted to pick up that phone and start screaming at the business guys on the other side of the deal. Understandably so. Yet he had to decide between the different parts of himself. In my emotional self, I'm outraged, I feel betrayed, this is injustice, right? In his warrior, I'm going to take a stand, I'm going to say, this is not okay. And as a thinker, in his rational business self, it's a good deal for his business. And in fact, it's the very deal he agreed to. It's not even a different deal. He already agreed to the deal the day before, and he thought it was a good business opportunity then. And his dreamer might likewise say, we did this deal because we think this contract is going to move us forward towards our strategy, or it's going to help us in the direction we're trying to go. But then you still have this part saying, I don't care. Right? I don't care about the deal. I just, I've been wronged. And that part is not wrong. Right? From this lover-warrior perspective, it's perfectly legitimate to say the most important thing in this situation now is that I call this guy, I call him on what he did, I get to tell him that I don't respect his business practices. That's what this sort of lover-warrior wants to do. But in this moment, he can either just do that and put the deal at risk, or he can notice, okay, part of me, that's what that part wants to do. Another part of me is excited about the future that the contract represents, and rationally speaking, I've run the numbers, it's going to be a profitable deal. Now these guys have to decide. And there's no right or wrong choice. They're all legitimate. The only thing you want to make sure to do is choose. And very often, we make important choices in this kind of situation just on autopilot, right? I mean, if you're the kind of person who always speaks up and shares your feelings, that's what you're going to do, regardless of the business opportunity. If you live your life in a rational, logical, business framework, you're going to just keep going and may not notice that there's a part of you that is really hurt and angry, that feels betrayed. And you are abandoning that part of you completely. You don't even notice that they're there. And by the way, if that's a pattern you carry for 15 years, you'll start to notice when you have a heart attack when you're 46, right? I mean, you can't just ignore these strong emotional experiences for your whole life. They will ultimately, many people would say, and I would say myself, they will show up in the body. They will show up in disease. I mean, things have to be worked through. So in that case, more or less, we really were just weighing, if this were a one-time, sign the deal, exchange goods, we have the transaction, we don't have to work with this guy again, then it might make more sense to just let the thinker-dreamer go forward. If this was a situation where these two guys were going to need to work together a lot for the next decade, and now they have no trust, right? The guy in Europe said he doesn't operate in good faith. You can't build a working relationship on that. You're going to have to say, I really need for you to help me believe that this really was an honest mistake, because it doesn't seem that way. They're going to have to work that out to make the deal succeed over time. So I would encourage you to just start thinking about situations in your own life where you might have made a move quickly, whether to say something, not to say something, to express your feelings, to make a certain kind of evaluative decision, to throw caution to the wind and not measure risk because you're so inspired and excited. And in those moments, you want to call on one of the big four that's not at the table and just tap in and ask yourself, does my dreamer, warrior, lover, thinker have a piece of wisdom here? that I need to think about before I just move. To put that on a bigger scale, just for a minute, I've talked a lot about being more effective and having higher performance, higher performing teams and organizations. It's also true that many, many traditions, wisdom traditions, psychological traditions, now I think some neuroscientific traditions in terms of being able to measure heart rate variability and all sorts of coherence in the body, have said for generations that the way to not only an effective life and a high-performing life, but also a meaningful life, a fulfilling life, is to bring the different parts of yourself into some kind of harmonious balance. This is a very timeless image for that, right? These parts are all interwoven together. The black is in the white is in the black. They're round and circular, so they're just in a constant cycle that moves. But this symbol, in essence, is also saying as a way of life, you really want to have all the different parts of who you are interdependent, active, alive, available, because there's a deeper wisdom to what that will bring through you over the course of your life. I love this cat. This cat is looking at a lion in the mirror. So I said to myself, self, you're amazing. The last part is just to decide to commit that you're going to expand your profile over time. Whatever constellation you have today, I use these two a lot, I don't use this one. That's not your personality. You're not locked into that way of living. That is the way today you are balancing these parts of you. It's not a death sentence. It doesn't really tell you anything about how you're going to start to live, love, lead, work with other people tomorrow. And I want to share with you just a personal example that I had with this, because it really brought home to me the truth of this, is that these things are fluid and ever-changing. So I grew up on the East Coast. I don't know if any of you could tell that I came from New York, but in case that wasn't obvious, I am originally from New York. And I grew up in a pretty traditional Jewish household. And my whole life, my family had a fantasy for me, which I deeply integrated, that I would get married around 25, 26 to some ideally rabbinical student. But anyway, some nice Jewish guy from Manhattan, and then we'd have some kids, and then send them to medical school. So it turns out I went through my 20s, I went through my 30s. I met my beloved when I was 40. Not only was I 40, but the man who I ultimately married was married before. So he has a little son from his first marriage. And he lives in the Netherlands, not anywhere near Manhattan. He lives in the Netherlands, and he has shared custody, obviously, of his son. So if I want the guy, then I want Europe and the whole thing. Not my dream. It wasn't. So I went through a really challenging period of confusion, but I know my dream. My dream is I was going to meet this guy, and then I was going to have these kids, and we're going to live in the suburbs, maybe Massachusetts. And I had to confront in my dreamer, that dream already didn't happen, right? I already am not 35 with 2 kids, and I'm actually 40 unmarried with no kids. So I'm still attached to that dream, but actually that dream already didn't happen. So here's a real opportunity with a guy who I actually love. It represents a life towards which I have no dreams. I have no visions of living in Europe. I have no dreams. I have no fantasy, I promise you, of learning to speak Dutch. But that's my life now. And so in that life, I do have to say to myself, okay, dreamer, we got to find a new dream. Here I am. I live in the Netherlands. I have this fantastic stepson who refuses to speak a word of English. Still love the guy. It's a totally new world. And I could sit every day in my new life thinking my life just didn't work out, if I stay attached to that dream, or I could say no. It's a new day. And I really work at trying to imagine, what's the happiest life for myself here? What's the highest potential I have in this context to fulfill myself, my purpose, my possibility, and a different vision of a family. than what I would have had. So I share that with you only because it's not just, oh, the dreamer has a dream. Like, yeah, that's right. And then maybe that doesn't happen. So then what? Okay, well, you have to keep going. The lover, has a relationship but gets hurt, devastated, brokenhearted. You say, well, okay, well, forget that. That whole people thing didn't work out. No, your lover has experiences. You learn, and you say, okay, let me find out when that part of me is ready to engage again. You keep going. And that's what this, expand your profile over time means. Every day of your life is a new opportunity to use parts of yourself you haven't been using or to tap into potential you have that's just waiting for you, right? Just waiting for you to invite that part of yourself in. So I'm going to stop here because I'm also watching the clock and just wanted to ask any comments, questions. Doesn't have to be a question. Could be just your own reflection or impression. And also, of course, I'm happy to take questions. Yes?
So I've been studying the Myers-Briggs and this kind of profiling.
Yeah.
And yeah, like you said, often I feel like I'm sentenced to
Right.
A label.
He's saying that he feels sentenced in some of these typing systems. Like, okay, that's the sentence.
Right. But as we if I try to adjust and try to bring, the other aspect of my four out,
Yeah.
doesn't it result in indecisiveness, internal contention, and how to overcome that?
I think that's the dilemma of trying to learn anything, right? You could say, okay, in my comfort zone here, I'm really good at this, so I'll spend my life just in this comfort zone. So how does it feel to operate in your comfort zone? Just shout out. What are some things you feel in your comfort zone?
Safe.
Competent, safe. What else do you feel in your comfort zone? Relaxed, comfortable.
Boring.
It's boring. Yes. Say again? You're unchallenged. Right, so it's both. You're in your comfort zone. You already know how to do this. It's safe and comfortable and also boring, and you're not challenged. Then you step out. Now you're outside your comfort zone. So what does it feel like being outside your comfort zone?
Scary, exciting.
It's scary. It's exciting.
Exhilarating.
It can be exhilarating.
Exhausting.
Exhausting.
Threatening.
Can be threatening. That's the uncomfort part of going out of the comfort zone, right? So it's also both. It's not comfortable. It's not necessarily feel safe. Don't necessarily feel confident right when you're trying to do something new. However, it's exhilarating. It's exciting. You actually do learn. And if you continue to practice the things that are outside of your zone today, right, down the road, you realize, hey, actually, now those things are included within my comfort zone. And they're not scary anymore. Now we better try something else. So this town is, in my mind, and Silicon Valley, about pushing ourselves to a future we don't know yet, right? Going into what's uncertain, not staying with what's tested and true, but asking, what's the coolest new smart thing we can bring to the world a year from now, 5 years from now? That's also a good mindset for life. I think you don't want to spend your whole life being safe and bored. Yes?
Yes, I do have a question. First, I thank you. I read the first 2 pages. I think it's great book.
Yes! She read the first 2 pages. She loves it.
Yeah, so when you have exercise, I practice with
Oh, yeah.
this great gentleman. And I realize it's like because I'm female, I'm more like a dreamer and a lover. And what he said, I think he's more like a thinker and a warrior. So do you think the gender difference will provide different profiles?
I've thought about this, of course, a fair amount. I think the difference is less and less, to be honest. I think we in this room, and some of us are older and some of us are younger than ourselves, I think we in this room still grew up in worlds where boys and girls were socialized quite differently. Right? At least when I was growing up, and that it's already very different. Boys played on sports teams, there were clear goals, there were winners and losers, right? And my friends and I played school, where I was the teacher, of course, and they were my students. But our games were just about talking to each other. That was our game all the time. We could play, I don't know, Any game that had a structure called we talk to each other and communicate and we connect. You can't win or lose at that game. The worst thing is if the girls don't want you in their group anymore. That's devastating. And that's quite final, actually. If you think about losing a soccer game, you could win next week. So do I think that in our generation, we, in general, were raised to pursue value, connection, relationship, imagination and fantasy, dreamer kind of stuff, and that boys were raised more doing competitive things where you could see a winner and a loser? Were they conditioned more towards thinker and warrior? I think yes, but, and it's a big but, I don't think that's really that true anymore. I think many, many of those things have broken down. If I look at young guys today, they're sharing co-parenting with their women. They're taking quite seriously, like we're both responsible for nurturing, right? Obviously, girls today are playing on all kinds of sports teams, and they do grow up loving competition. They do grow up wanting to win. So I don't think it's inborn genetically, as you can hear. I think it has to do with what's rewarded and encouraged. And I think the kids who are kids now, and as they become older and enter the workforce, I don't think you're going to see that as a very clear line.
Yeah, US soccer Olympics, the Olympic team, women's, very competitive.
Right? It would be worth you asking yourself, how much is there a real story here about me as a woman, and how much is that story how I get myself off the hook from saying, I really should use my warrior, my thinker, right? Yeah, and not say, oh, but I'm a woman, so that, sorry. No, I would say, let's just establish there might be an element of that, but get rid of it and see what becomes possible. Yeah.
What happened in your euro to US dollar? Clearly someone called you for counsel,
yeah.
Right? And the reason why I'm really curious about that is, so when you're typically in a business scenario and you have this,
yeah.
We kind of get coached to do a little bit of both, right? So you say, you suck, smiley, smiley, smiley. You betrayed me, smiley, 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 and here's how we will move forward.
Wait, how is that doing both? That sounded like a lot of smiling.
You say that.
Yes, you smiley, smiley, and then you sign.
And then the emoticons, and all the, you betrayed me, but we'll still do business.
And then 3 years later, you see them at a cocktail party. You're like, hey, you talking about being friends?
So how does
Let's think about that whole euro US dollars thing. Yes. So in many situations like this, the key is to find the both and, right? Not to choose, but it has to be a real both and. It can't be like smiley, smiley, you betrayed me, but hey, let's move on. I mean, that's not actually honoring the reality of this perspective, right? So then the question is, rather than saying to myself, do I give, clear, tough performance feedback to this person, because there's a hard truth and I want them to get it, or should I be nice and encouraging and tell them I believe in them? That's not a choice. You should be nice and encourage them and tell them you believe in them and give them difficult feedback if that's what they need to perform. You really want to do both. It's not, as I said, it's not thinker or feeler or dreamer or warrior. That's what the yin and yang symbol is saying. You have to draw on them all. So what we did in this case, he said, it's a good business deal from a thinker perspective. I don't want to blow it up. I do believe it's part of the future of the industry, dreamer perspective. And I am so upset and angry because I don't believe it was an honest mistake. And I can't move on from that. So what are we going to do? So what we did was we arranged a conversation for this executive with the other side's lawyer. And we said, okay, let's keep the other business guy out of this for now. Let's give him benefit of the doubt for now, that maybe it was a mistake. But our guy said, I want to sit face to face in a conference room with that guy, and I want to say, you persuade me that this was an honest mistake. Because right now I don't trust your client, and I don't feel good about moving forward. And so the guy brought out various emails, various documentation, trying to show communication. He said, look, draft after draft after draft. It says euros, 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 euros. I don't know why this turned into dollars. It could have literally been, the administrative help that was typing this up. It was genuinely a mistake. He said all this email communications between the lawyer and the client. He said, you see no exchanges here saying, hey, we can get, create some extra value by changing the currency. There's no indication, volition, to rip you off. I'm telling you, it was an honest mistake. And, we'll never know, but the client genuinely was skeptical walking in, and at the end of the meeting, he thought, yeah, could be an honest mistake, and there isn't really evidence otherwise, and it was enough. He let it go, and he didn't talk about it with his partner in the deal. So, it's another example also of asking yourself, if there's a part of me that has a need or that's upset about something, is there a creative way, right, that I can take care of that legitimate need that I have without putting at risk something else that I'm worried about? If I feel like you really can't take tough performance feedback, but I know if you don't get the message, you might lose your job, maybe I say, I'm going to go to your manager and say, listen, you're going to have to give some coaching over time, because if she doesn't get better at this, I don't think she's going to stay, and I'm letting you know that because I don't think I'm the right person to tell her, but I do want her to get the information, right? So by giving everybody a voice, you can then start to strategically ask yourself, by what path can they all get their needs met? Does that make sense? Yeah. To my dying day, I'm going to wonder whether that was a mistake. I'm never going to know. Yes?
It was interesting, you mentioned all the different systems that had 4 types, like going back to Plato's artisans, guardians, and rational.
Yeah, incredible references in philosophy.
Did you see whether your 4 align with other 4s, and why do you think there's 4, not 3 or 5?
That's a good question. What I would say is that my 4 are an attempt to translate a lot of very esoteric material into language that everyday mainstream business people can use and understand. So I think there's a close, although not perfect, relationship, for example, in the Kabbalistic tradition, mystical Jewish tradition of the 4 worlds. There's a relationship in many different traditions where you would say, I see the seeds of this map in this system. The language is very different. Some of it's not that different. Many indigenous people have, earth, fire, air, water. 4 core elements of life. And I have mapped them here. Some say north, south, east, and west. Some use the seasons. But I've looked at acupuncture. I've looked at the 5 Buddha families. I've looked at, many different traditions. Asking, is there some way to boil this down and to translate is really the best word I have. Translate it into language that we all in our world now, can understand and use to get better at what we do. So I did pick the 4 because they seem to me, again, reading things in translation, to be close to the truth of what I saw over and over. And what I saw over and over was 4, by the way. It's not like these guys, the Buddha families are 5, but and of course there are some 3s. But I'll be honest in saying many, many systems over thousands of years that try to describe the essence of the human condition, the essence of human nature, will identify by their own language these 4. I will also say, and sort of beyond what we can do today, you are not just 4, you're not just your big 4, you're a lot more than that. For example, the part of you that is aware of the big 4 isn't one of them, right? So what's going on there? So in the book, I do talk about the transformers, these 3 aspects of our identity that are almost like a board of directors that are overseeing the operating big 4, right? Like a board, they want to make sure the big 4 are acting properly and optimizing value and not breaking the law. But these transformers, like a board, aren't attached to any particular one of the 4. And so once you get the lay of the land of the 4, then the fun really starts. Because you start to learn about the parts of yourself that can exert choice over these guys. It's like put yourself behind the steering wheel and put these guys in the back seat. Let yourself lead your life, not let your warrior lead your life because he always has, or let your warrior lead your life because she always has. You want to lead your life, so you have to learn also about the part of yourself that's actually bigger than the big four. And many, many traditions, of course, support that, from witness awareness to mindfulness. I talk about the lookout, part of yourself that's on the lookout inside of you for what's going on. And the captain is the part of you that chooses.
So you mean to say my ex is not my board of directors?
Well, trying to understand the operating model of your ex, that is actually the advanced course. I do offer that, but it's like in a weekend format, and it's very confidential, so I can't speak about that. But I'm glad you're asking the question. I think that's really the key. Any other comments or questions?
Just go back to
Please.
the Euro US dollar.
Yeah.
Was it helpful to identify, when you talked to those different parties, did
Yeah.
you identify what the different elements or just address the different ways? Do you see what when you were talking to the one side and then?
No, the beauty of the system is how easy it is to use, right? So my clients said, look, literally, we had 4 chairs. And I said, okay, I want you to sit in this chair, and I want to hear your dreamer talk about this opportunity. As your dreamer, you laugh, but just wait. And the dreamer comes with this incredible opportunity and what's going to become possible. The dreamer's very angry and upset that these guys want to blow up the deal, right? A dreamer sees this could fulfill a vision that the dreamer's had for 10 years, right? And we hear from the warrior, and we hear from the thinker, and we hear from the lover. And then what I do often with clients is I might say, okay, Sean, I want you to stand over here. I'm going to play back to you just a little highlight of what each of these parts of you said. And as you stand back, and you can just sort of hear into these perspectives, what's the inner wisdom in you? Not attached to any of them. What comes up for you about the wise course of action here? That's the stance of the captain. Like, okay, I get it, I hear you guys, and I have to decide what is best. And the language is very helpful, so I don't shy away from it because it's very clarifying. If I say, I want to hear from your lover, these possible slight digression, but only for a minute. These, of course, are based on archetypes, which MBTI was also, right? For those of you who study Jung, these are fundamental human patterns that Jung believes are just inborn into the psyche. From the moment we arrive, no one needs to teach you how to have your heart beat. No one teaches you, to move your lungs. He would say, no one needs to teach you what these forces mean. They're inborn, they're in you. Just like you would know mother or father before someone taught it to you, or you might know villain and savior before someone taught it to you. Have any of you guys ever seen a little girl, 5 or 6 years old, who works out a little dance routine that's like this, like a little shake, little eyes? And you're like, who are the friends of this girl? Right? Where are her parents? She didn't have to learn that. It's inborn, right? She's going to grow into the mature expression of it. But it's in her. No one taught that to her, probably. It's not like she's watching the wrong TV. So they're inborn in us. And the reason why it's such a quick intervention with executive teams, giving it to employees through a company, because once you get the language, you can actually tap into these quite easily, much more so than it may appear to you sitting here now, because they're fundamental forces that are in us. And each one of them carries their own wisdom, which is why it's a shame to leave 1 or 2 of them behind in your life. You're missing out on what they have to offer you. He's like, oh my God, they're starting to bring out multiple chairs. I think I just suddenly remembered I had a conference call right exactly now. No, I'm teasing. Thanks for coming. Oh, good. Oh, thank God. He's going to his therapist. I like to have that effect on people. They run from my sessions and call 911. Any other questions or comments? Yes?
I feel like we flipped back and forth between the transactional, which is here's a situation that I'm faced with, and here's where I need to be, and here's the way I need to think about it, versus the resilience over a journey, right? So how you need to evolve.
Yeah.
do you track, and I haven't read the book, so apologies if it's in there, but
Well, get to that.
yeah. Is it something that you talk about? Have you mapped people on their journey as to how well they go into these different personas or decision-making patterns, or when they do it and when they choose not to?
Yeah.
Or is that something that...
No, it's a great question. It's a great question. So the third of the transformers is a part I call the Voyager, which is unique to each of you. What's your voyage? But there are also, patterns that you can see. So one pattern that is typical might be you start in your career as an individual contributor, right? You have tasks, you're executing in certainly knowledge companies. You're using thinker and warrior because that's what your job requires of you to do. And then if you're very good technically, you might get promoted to a managerial position and you have a few people reporting to you, and now, oh my God, right? I mean, what do I know about managing people? So the opportunity will almost demand that you learn about those lever skills, employee engagement, inspirational leadership, building a powerful, cohesive team. You may not have needed that lever so much when you just, had to do your job, but now you're leading a team. Managers who are successful will also get promoted into positions of firm-wide leadership, right? And now they really need to be able to access and share the dream. It's the vision of our company, right? They need to be inspiring people with their imagination and possibly getting up at annual meetings, right? And here's my vision and for our strategy. Lover and warrior aren't going to be very helpful at that point, right? Even thinker and warrior aren't going to be helpful. Even lover for senior leaders usually isn't enough, right? People want to know, where are we going? What's the vision? Why should I care about that? Why do I trust that I should follow you? Because you see where we're headed. And those kind of things, as well as innovating new products and services, right? No shortage of the dreamer here. But in many, many businesses, when managers become executives, they have to go on a journey to remember, I haven't been using my dreamer in so long. How does that work again? Because it's quite different. Imagination, intuition, sensing, what's happening is very different than the other three. So to generalize, I think there are paths that require evolution. And of course, everyone has their own journey. Those are both true. Okay, I'm getting the sense, because I'm very in tune and discerning, I'm sensing that we should bring this to a close. So thank you guys so much for coming. I really appreciate the chance to dialogue with you.